Welcome to devlog number 3 of my factory game. In the last two, I built the core logic and designed the machines, but now it's time to replace the color cubes that I'm using for the products with something more appealing and that actually fits the game. The problem is, there are already a ton of factory games on Steam and I needed a way to stand out. So that's why I made a pretty radical decision that honestly made me hesitate a bit. Instead of crafting metals or electronics, in this game you build humans, starting from cells by making your own human assembly line of machines. That decision came with a lot of unexpected challenges, from reverse engineering the human body to designing a production system that can actually assemble it piece by piece. In this video, I'll show you how I made all of that work. Let's get into it. If I want you to make humans in this game, I first need to know what the process will be to get there. But where should you even start from? To help me figure this out, I started with the final product, a full human, and worked backwards to make a diagram of all the parts you'll need to get there. That will converge in the start with the stem cells. It took me a while to plan it all out while being limited by the 4 product slots that are available in the assembler machines I already have in the game. In the end it was a mess, so I cleaned it up a little bit for the video so it's easier to follow. First of all, since there are a lot of parts, I put them into 2 categories. The body modules are the main distinguishable parts of the body, from large parts like an arm to smaller ones like a hand, including internal parts like a lung or rib cage. The raw anatomy includes more generic parts that make the body modules. These can be nerves, skin, muscles, and bones you get when combining the cells from their respective type, which are also part of this category. So how will this apply in game? Let's take an arm for example. To make it, you'll need the upper arm, forearm, and hand. Now let's zoom into the forearm. That's where you enter the raw anatomy category. You'll need 4 pieces of skin, 2 medium muscles, 2 big bones, and some nerves. And if we go even deeper into, let's say, the skin, you'll need 4 skin cells for each piece, which come from the base of everything, the stem cell, that can be processed into skin, muscles, bones, or nerve cells using the processor machines. Since a lot of the products are segments of the human, I decided to model the full body first. That way, once it was done, I could just quickly separate it into individual parts, or so I thought. Before I even started modeling, I want to get inspiration for the proportion of the human. I didn't want to use realistic proportions because 1, this is not a simulator, and 2, you're going to be watching the model zoomed out while playing the game, so it needs to pop up a little for you to tell them apart easily. So after watching a lot of references, I picked this one, from which I took their proportions of my human from. I started the modeling right away, starting from the head and torso, and then I followed it up with the legs and arms. It took me some days, but here is the result. It looks pretty awful. I think the main issue is I don't have much experience modeling organic shapes, and I was so worried about keeping it low on detail so the game can potentially display hundreds of them without performance issues that I forgot not to make an abomination. To solve this, I went looking for more references and tips to model human faces, and I fell into the rabbit hole of pre-made assets. And that's where I found this. It really fits the aesthetic I want for the game and had a way better topology than my model, so I ended up scrapping my work, swallowing my pride, and paying $9 for it. The main issue with it is that some parts weren't quite right for this game, so I spent some time modifying it to make it have the proportions I wanted. To finish it up, I texture painted it to give it a more polished, organic feel. The model for the human now looks pretty good and it has enough detail to avoid looking blocky, but it's still simple enough for the game to handle hundreds of them on screen. With that done, I can move on to the next step. Now that I had the full human body finished, I thought I would separate the parts in no time. But I was very wrong. My first attempt at separating a part, the upper arm, went pretty smoothly, but then I noticed a problem. If I did the same for the rest, there's no way anyone would be able to tell them apart. They would basically be undistinguishable lumps of meat, especially from far away. To take care of that problem, I decided to include the bones popping out where the cuts were made. That way I can accentuate the differences of the parts. That decision made me stare for countless hours at medical models and diagrams of bones to figure out what shapes they actually have around the body. Of course, they were just as references, because I still exaggerated them and made them more cartoony. In models like the upper arm and forearm, I showed bones on both sides of the separation. For others, like the thigh and calf, I only added bones on one side, and for smaller parts like the hand and foot, I just suggested the bones through the texture instead. I don't want this game to be gore or anything, so I went with simple coloring for the textures and had to change the recipe for the head. Originally, it was something like head base plus ears plus nose plus small muscles, but after trying that, it looked a little bit too creepy, so I switched the recipe to something that doesn't involve separating those parts. Not gonna lie, I burned a lot of hours doing this, but these parts are very important for the game, so in the end it was all worth it for the visual clarity and overall look. While I was working on it, I ran a poll on Discord to ask if people thought the graphics were too gory or off-putting, and most people say they were fine. So I'm keeping them for now, but let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, the main parts are done, but we're not finished with the body models yet. The torso has a lot of internal parts you'll need to make in order to assemble it. The recipe is a torso skeleton which I represented with a spine, ribcage and pelvis, that I kept with a solid color texture because I don't think they need any more detail or complexity. They are recognizable enough on their own. You'll also need the torso muscles, which are represented with the same torso model that I separated from the full human, but with another texture that roughly shows the muscles that go into it. The texture may not be that anatomically correct, but I really think it looks good. The third product of the recipe is the torso organs, which I modeled separately. I just modeled and textured the most important ones, starting with the heart, which I kept really low poly, but added detail with its texture. Then I moved on to the lungs, which I represented with this shape and added some characteristic lines in its texture. For the intestine, I made a very basic shape that I duplicated following a curve. It's actually the simplest model I've made, but I think it looks just as good as the others. The rest of the organs are represented with a generic one that's loosely shaped like a liver with a simple texture. The last component of the recipe is some skin sheets to wrap the torso, but I'll show those in detail later since they are part of the raw anatomy, which I hadn't started yet. Oh, and since I was already doing the internal parts, I took the opportunity to make the brain. This took way less time than separating the limbs, head and torso, and I'm just as happy with the results. That's it for the body models. Now we can finally move to the last models to complete the whole process from cells to humans. In the raw anatomy category, we have 11 products, 5 of them being cells, the stem cells and 1 for each of the types I've mentioned before. The rest are what you could call their evolutions, and you'll see why in a second. For starters, I represented the cells in a way that ended up saving me a lot of modeling time, because they are using the same model of a liquid filled container that is going to have a different color depending on the cell it represents. Now let me explain what I meant by evolutions. When you mix a lot of the same cell, you will sort of evolve them into bigger versions of itself. The nerve cells will turn into a nerve bundle and then a nerve cluster. Yeah, those are nerves wrapped around in some jars. The bones are going to evolve into small, medium and big bone, and so will the muscles. Skin cells will become skin tissue and then skin sheet. They are very simple models, but I made sure the textures weren't flat so they look like skin. I kept all the raw anatomy stylized and generic, so it's easily recognizable and modular. I might add more detail later, but for now the models are done. And surprisingly, this section only took me about a day. After all that modeling and planning, this is the time we've been waiting for. It's time to bring everything into the game engine and finally make these parts work in game. I started with the really boring part to get it out of the way first. It just involved creating and assigning all the product data. That means writing product names and IDs, which I'll use later in the code to identify them, and filling in the recipes with the components needed and how much of each. Once that was done, the interesting part began. I exported the models from Blender and imported them into Unity. Then I set up their textures and created separate product objects. I used the size guide to make sure each product fits properly inside machines and on conveyor belts. I also created a separate scene to place all the products at the same position and angle. Then I took screenshots and edited them into icons that I assigned to the in-game product images. Since the code for the products was already done in the previous devlogs, that's all the setup I needed. And even though the setup was simple, it took me literally hours, because counting all the products, I had to repeat the process 41 times. Still, it was totally worth it. Just seeing them move on the conveyor belts is very rewarding after all this work. And it led me one big step closer to making the game actually playable and fun, and ultimately publishing it on Steam. So yeah, all the product visuals are finally working in the game, and it's actually starting to take shape and feel like a real factory game. Did I want too far by making this game about making humans? Let me know in the comments. And also, if you have any ideas or opinions about the game or whatever, just put them in the comments and I'll read them. If you want to see this project evolve into a full-on playable game, subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications because you won't want to miss next update. Thank you for watching, bye bye.